Good morning, Panthers. Today we're going to talk about the Aztecs. Last week, Miss Adamsack talked to you about the Mayans and the Incas. So I want to start out talking about who were the Aztecs. Aztecs is the name for all the people who live in the Aztec Empire created by the Mexica. The Mexa have a myth about where they came from. The story says their god, Huitzilopochtli, instructed them to travel to a new place, and the Mexica wandered around the central portion of present-day Mexico for 200 years. Finally, they reached the Valley of Mexico. It was there that their god gave them a sign. The gods told the Aztecs to search for an eagle holding a snake in his beak perched atop a cactus. This is where they were to build their capital city. The Aztecs saw this sign on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco. This is a map of the location. Tenochtitlan was the capital city of the Aztec Empire. Again, it was built on an island on Lake Texcoco. Today, Tenochtitlan is Mexico City. How did the Aztecs build a city in the center of a lake? It was connected to the mainland by a causeway. A causeway is a raised road that allowed the people to easily travel over the swampy and wet areas. The city was interlaced with a series of canals so that all sections of the city could be visited either on foot or by canoe. Now I want to turn our attention to the government and the social structure of the Aztecs. The Aztecs created an empire through conquest. The Aztecs had an emperor who was the supreme leader over the people. He lived in the capital of Tenochtitlan. There was many cities in the Aztec Empire. The emperor oversaw the markets and temples, supported by the army, and resolved legal disputes. The emperor placed one noble in charge of each city. The nobles were supposed to report to the emperor and run their city as the emperor directed. But in truth, most nobles ran their cities any way they wanted. The laws of the Aztec people were for all people in all cities. These laws were written down. If you broke the law, your punishment was listed along with the law. The laws were very harsh. Many of the laws included a punishment of death. There was one way to escape punishment, but it was only good one time. This was called the one-time forgiveness law. If you confess your crime to a priest before your crime was discovered, you would be forgiven once. Although the Aztec government was well organized, the emperor and the nobles faced the problems of a growing population. They needed to grow more food, to build more schools, to fill more storehouses, and to create more temples. They also needed more captives, people they could sacrifice to feed the hungry gods. To fix the problems, the Aztecs conquered tribes and demanded local rulers to pay tribute. Tribute was paid in the form of food, clothing, building supplies, captives, etc. Either the tribes paid the tribute or Aztec warriors would sacrifice the entire tribe to the Aztec gods. Now we're going to cover social structure. The Aztec Empire had a strict social structure that was identified with nobles, commoners, serfs, or slaves. The social structure was also identified with boys and girls. The noble class had many privileges, and the class consisted of government, military leaders, priests, and lords. They had some wealth and were allowed to enjoy works of art, unlike the common people. As a noble, you were in the position of leadership and influence of others. The noble class also received a full education and were allowed to wear fancy clothing and decorate their homes to show their status. The commoners consisted of farmers and merchants who would travel to trade. Both farmers and merchants had a fair amount of freedom and independence. Common people were also allowed to dress nice. They enjoyed the great amount of wealth they received and prestige within the class. The serfs worked on the land owned by nobles and did not live in the capuli. If the serfs failed to pay tribute, they often became slaves for their punishment, or sometimes were used as human sacrifices. The slaves. The slaves had many rights in the Aztec Empire. The slaves had rights to marry, have children, substitute another in their place, and buy freedom. The slaves' owners had many responsibilities for the slaves to make sure they would not be resold. The slave owners were responsible for feeding the slaves and providing housing. Boys and girls. Boys received a wider education than girls and were taught how to fight and become leaders. On the other hand, the girls were taught to cook, take care of the family, and run home. Yet women did have a lot of power in the society, although it was often kept a secret. Though people were born into a certain class, it was possible to move up the ranks within a lifetime. I've just concluded our lesson on Aztec government and social structure. Have a nice day, and I'm looking forward to the other lessons throughout the week.